Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dodson, and welcome to the show. Hi, and welcome to episode 240 of Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Dodson, and welcome back to the show. In this episode, we're going to be talking minutes versus mils and the little white lie that's constantly sold to hunters here in the United States on the preference of the two. So this is something that a video came across my desk with earlier this week, and I'm going to give examples for both sides. This is going to be even-handed. It's not going to be like, well, this is the way it is, but I believe a lot of the hunting community has been told this little white lie a little too long, and if they know the math, they know it's not correct, and we're here to share it with you. So hopefully a great podcast, hopefully open the doors up maybe to some new possibilities of things to look at that might be of a big benefit to hunters in North America. So without further ado, here we go. Before I get started, I want to say a quick thank you to a couple of our advertisers and sponsors. The first I would like to say thank you to is Krieger Barrels. Krieger is the maker of cut rifle barrels. They are an American-made company, one of the oldest custom barrel makers in the country as well. We use them as our first choice on all of our custom rifles here and have used them for decades. They offer a new program called Krieger Direct. We can log on and purchase a in-stock barrel in as little as 2 to 3 business days for product that they regularly put up for sale for purchases. They also have another page there of overruns or barrels that they would just have like oddballs that would go up. Maybe a customer canceled an order. These are all custom contours or sometimes custom twists. Sometimes they're just straight up blanks. They have a page for that as well. So if you want the best and you would like to get it now, you can log on to KriegerBarrels.com and look at their fine selection today. We would also like to thank MDT. MDT is the maker of fine rifle chassis. They make a lot of different makes and models, including what I consider one of the best sub $500 chassis on the market called the Oryx. So they make a lot of competition chassis. They make the HNT 26 hunting chassis and just a wide variety of accessories. So one of the things when you get into one of these chassis, there are a lot of chassis makers on the market, but just having all the little things that make all the difference, the things that you might want to look for, modifications, bag riders, barricade stops. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. So if you're into or would like to upgrade your rifle using a chassis, getting something to fit you properly, getting something with an adjustable length of pull, an adjustable cheek piece, we recommend MDT. Stop over at mdttac.com. That's mdttac.com today. Minutes versus mils. Here we go. So a video come across our desk from Gunworks in which Aaron, the self-proclaimed professional of all things in long-range hunting and shooting, had declared that minutes are the language of North American hunters. And his proclamation was the fact that everybody knows that 1 MOA at 100 yards equals an inch, or 1 inch at 100 yards equals 1 MOA. And then we're going to talk about the BDC turrets in the next podcast. But with this one, we're going to actually deal with the little white lie of the MOA. And we're going to give both sides a story. This isn't going to be a one-size pitch to say, well, this is why everybody should shoot mil radian. But there are some advantages to mils. And when you really pull back the layers on the MOA, what it truly is, how it truly works, and what the measurements really are, the advantages of the MOA and the simplicity of which they try to sell the MOA-based system, in which case they're trying to use the BDC turrets, goes away. And I think for most shooters, when they learn to use mil radian and the advantages of mils, which we'll talk about both minutes and mils openly on things that I like about both, then all of a sudden the pendulum starts to swing to say, hey, there's a lot of reasons why considering looking at mils, not just for any type of tactical shooting, but for hunting. It is a game changer. So we're going to address this piece by piece, bit by bit, and we're going to try to sort of open the curtains a little bit on the MOA, a little white lie. The first problem with MOA and how they oversimplify it, well, the YouTube short that they posted up for Gunworks, which had Aaron, proclaiming this, that everybody knows that MOA is the language of North American hunters or big game hunters. And everybody knows the simplicity that we shoot in yards, which that part I can agree with. We usually measure everything here in North America in yards. And everybody knows that 1 inch at 100 yards equals 1 MOA. That's not true. That's not true at all. And when you use that as a simplicity tool to justify the BDC turns and all the things they do with that, it really, A, it confuses shooters, but B, it's actually wrong. It's really wrong. So let's just start talking about MOA. Now, I grew up shooting MOA. Truth be told, I have killed more animal shooting minutes than mills. And as I got more into match shooting, there are reasons why I switched over to Milradian. I also remember in the early years where I had minute knobs and milling reticles, which thank God we don't have to do that no more. So you actually had to learn and run both systems almost at the same time, engaging different targets for different reasons. So the MOA, right out of the gate, it's not 1 inch at 100 yards. Now, I know a lot of you guys probably know this, but a true minute of angle is 1.047 inches at 100 yards. In order for the statement for Aaron to be true, you would have to zero your rifle at 95.5 yards for that minute to equal 1 inch. It's 5% off right out of the gate. So you're not quite into B territory, but if you're taking a math test, that's not a perfect score. So if you wanted to equal 1 inch with a minute, you would have to zero your rifle exactly at 95.5 yards. The argument is that 1 minute at 100 yards is 1 inch and each click is a quarter minute. Not true either. A true quarter minute click at 100 yards is actually, are you ready for this? Anything but simple. It is 0.26175 inches. Do that in your head really quick. 0.26175 inches. There isn't an even number in that, right? So when you're adjusting your dope, even at 100, and you're, I'm a half inch, I'm going to move 2 clicks, you're not moving a half inch. You're moving 0.26175 times 2, which equals 0.5235. So the little white lie with minutes is that it's 1 inch at 100 yards. Now, we do round it for that for simplicity purposes, but it's not right. It's not even close. It's actually a 5% off. So when they sell this, well, we speak yards and minutes is the language of yards. Well, that's not true. We have to step back a little bit and look at minutes and mills as what they're trying to do. Anytime we're trying to dial dope at distance, what we're doing is we're trying to calculate our drop in inches, and we're trying to move it to some type of angle formula that allows us to dial it into our scope. Because as we get further out, that value that we dial into our optics goes up significantly. So, for example, if we dial 1 minute at 100 yards, that means it moves our point of impact at each significant distance beyond that more. So, for example, let's just say that we're talking and leaving 1 MOA at 100 yards. Well, we know we're moving our point of impact 1.047 inches. That same minute that we're dialing at 100 yards, we're, in simplicity purposes, we're saying it moves our point of impact, 1 inch at 100 yards, 2 inches at 200 yards, 3 inches. But that's not true. At 300 yards, that 1 minute that we're dialing actually moves our point of impact 3.141 inches. There's nothing simple about it. At 500 yards, we're moving our point of impact 5.235 inches per 1 minute. And at 1,000 yards, we're moving 10.47 inches. So the little white lie is the fact that, well, we use, it's 1 inch at 100 yards, so it's very simple across the board, but we're using the wrong numbers. And it's not 1 inch at 100 yards, it's 1 inch at 95.5 yards. And the error as you keep moving out and the value of each of those clicks isn't as simple as and true to the numbers. We're actually lying and we're making up a number that's not true nor accurate at all these distances. And now we're going to turn it into a BDC turret that's going to give you your yardage. And we're going to talk about that more in a podcast next week. But the little white lie with minutes is that it's 1 inch at 100 yards and that it's just simple because it's the language of hunters and it's simple to use. And we all know that, 100 yards is 1 inch and we can do the math. But it's not true. It's based off of being rounded way more than what it should be and giving everybody this false narrative that at distance, this is what is moving our point of impact. And it's not correct. It's not correct at all. Now, why minutes or mils? So we're using these to try to take our drop and have something to divide it by in some type of, I would say, known number that we can move our point of impact at given distances. When we do ballistics charts here and have ballistics charts, we try to explain people really how this works. But in a nutshell, what they're doing is they're taking your distance that you're dropping. So, for example, if you're dropping 324.2 inches at 1,000 yards, well, what they're going to do is they're going to take that divided by 10, and then they're going to take that and divide it by 1.047, and it's going to tell you how many minutes you need to dial at that distance. They're doing the math for you. And they would do the same thing in mils. We know that 1 mil is 3.6 inches, right? And so we would say, okay, at 1,000 yards, they're going to do the math to bring it back to relative to us, the shooter, because 1/10 of a mil moves us 3.6 inches at 1,000 yards. They would just do the math, say, okay, well, 3.6 inches here moves us 36 inches there. So we would divide it by 36 inches, and that would tell us what we actually have to dial in mils. And it actually turns out to be a very even number of 9 mils. They would do the same thing for minutes. So in your ballistics chart, again, we're talking about a rifle 308 that typically needs 324.2 inches exactly to hit the center of the target with drop at 1,000 yards. They would say, okay, what is a true minute moving us at that distance? And in this case, it would be 10.47 inches. And then they would take that number, that drop, and they would divide it by that number of minutes, and it would tell them how many minutes they need to dial up to hit that target. In this case, it's 30.96. So when they're doing the ballistics chart, they're not using anything rounded. They're not rounding the minute to an inch. They're actually using the true formula for a minute of angle, which is 1.047 inches. Now, when you're using milradian, the number that we use, I think, is a lot simpler. So 1 mil is 3.6 inches. 1/10 of a mil, which is how most of your graduation is in most milradian-based scopes, is 0.36. We don't round it. That's the real number. And at any given distance, if we want to know what we're moving our point of impact, we just times the distance. So, for example, at 500 yards, 1/10 of a mil, we would take 0.36 times 5. And that gives us the actual number, not a guesstimation, not a close, not rounded. It's the real number. So with mils, you're dealing with facts. With minutes, you're dealing with two worlds. You're dealing with the factual part of it, which if the ballistics charts are doing their, or the calculators doing their work properly, they're using the number of 1.047. But then they're actually, saying to you, well, you're too really stupid to remember we're just going to make it 0.25. right, per quarter click, rather than the real number of, 0.26175, right? So they're saying it's simple. It's not. And they're actually wrong. Their error is pretty big in shooting and doing corrections at distance. It's a made-up number. It is made up to make it sound simpler and easier. It's made up to say here's a simplified version because we're too stupid to remember the other numbers, or that we don't want to know what the complicated number is because most people won't remember it. If you try to tell people, hey, each click is worth 0.26175, you need to move 0.72 inches. Could you imagine? They'd have to break out like a slide rule calculator and everything else just to calculate how many clicks left and right they would have to do. But 0.36 is an easy number, right? So, and it's the same number when you're using it at distance per 10th mil. It's the same number we would calculate to adjust our dope up and down at distance. It's the same number that they use when they actually calculate our drop. They don't use 0.35 to make it sound simpler, and then, or let's use 0.33 because, well, a third of an inch is easy for everyone to remember. We won't tell them that it truly is 0.36. We're going to make it sound like we're saving them the nightmare of having to remember all these difficult numbers. We'll just round a mil radian to 0.33. Well, that wouldn't make any sense. The number is 0.36. But they do that for minutes. They say, well, a quarter click is 0.26175. We'll just make it up and we'll make it a quarter. Why would you do that? It's not right. You wouldn't do it for mils. It would make no sense. So why does it make sense for minutes? The minute versus mil theory for Pennsylvania hunters and, North American hunters is the fact that we sort of have two systems here. We have, of course, our standard system, and we have metric. But if you go around the world, minute of angle is not what most people use. Most people are using a mil or centimeter based system, metric. We got stuck in MOA because, of course, we had to be different in everything. And in the military, you had both. You had minute knobs and milling reticles because, we couldn't have one system. So the argument that it is the language of hunters, that's not true. It's the language of North American hunters. It's the language being taught to North American hunters because we want to sell them BDC reticles and we want to do the work for them and sell them all of these things to make their life so much simpler. But if you look at hunters, there's a lot of hunters around the world and they are not all using minute of angle. As a matter of fact, we're probably the minority. Although North America has its fair share of hunters, we're not the only hunters in the world, right? And most of the hunters around the rest of the world are using mil. So when you start talking about MOA versus mil radian, here's another thing you have to take into consideration. So I'm going to play both sides because I've shot both. I shot minutes for, oh my gosh, up until I was probably in my mid-30s is when I really started moving everything over to mil. And for the simplicity purposes, I'm not here to tell you that mil is the correct answer. I'm here to give you really both sides of it. When they're using a BDC reticle, and I'm not going to get on this rabbit hole sort of today, I'm going to do it for the next one. They are just basically telling you what yardage to dial. There are more issues with that than Ellen DeGeneres in a Chippendales nightclub. I mean, that's the only thing I can say with it. We have had decades of people bringing those things to the school, and we're going to talk hugely in the next podcast on this one. But what really, for me, is that with minutes, we're rounding it. So we're not using real numbers when we're making all these adjustments at distance. We're not using the real number. It's impossible, actually. It's a very 0.26175 is quite a bit to take in when you're doing all this math at different distances. So in order to sell it to us, they dumb it down. And they don't do that for anything else. They make it a quarter inch, right? But for me, one of the bigger issues besides the fact that they're starting off with a little white lie to make it sound simple, because it isn't simple. It's when you start working at distance, the complication comes in, and when you start working with a reticle. So, for example, if we just take minutes and we start talking about the numbers involved in engaging targets at distance. Now, I know most North American hunters, I would say, really start to, 500 yards, maybe 700 yards max. For the average North American hunter, probably most of your normal shooting would be at 300 yards and in, right? But when you start looking at minutes, dialing true minutes now, mind you, you've got 4 numbers to remember when you get past 500 yards usually. And then with some flatter cartridges, maybe you'll get that out to 6 or 7. But just to give you an example, if I'm going to use this traditional 308, and I'm going to go ahead and engage a target at 500 yards, I need to dial up 10.15 minutes. That's the real number, right? I can't dial 0.15 minutes. I have to dial quarter minute. So do I round it up or down? Well, let's just say, for example, that this said 10.125. It was in the middle. Well, that means dialing minutes, which are supposed to be more accurate, I have a plus or minus of 0.65 inches. I know it's not ground shaking, but it's still there. But I also have to dial 10.25 or 10.5 or 10, right? So when I'm counting up the minutes and turning the knob, which is what I would prefer most people do, not using a BDC, but I've got to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.25, right? If we're taking the same shot in millradian, it's 2.95 for the true mill. We would round that up or down to 2.9 or 3. We are going to be, high or low, about 0.9 inches. So at 500 yards, we can get about a quarter inch closer to center if it were splitting it dead center down the middle. But when we shoot, we only have to dial up 2.9. So think about dialing up to 10.25, so 10 and then 0.25, and then think about reaching up, grabbing the knob, and turning it straight. And in this case, if we're saying it's in millradian, we're saying 2.95, we could round that to 3 mils, right? You reach up and go zip straight to 3 and shoot. 1, 2, 3. And when you get out to further distances, this is the one part that it makes it hard to memorize your dope shooting minute of angle because there are so many more numbers involved. So, for example, at 700 yards, the true number is 17.38 minutes. That's the true ballistics number. We have to round that up to 17 and a half or shoot 17 minutes to shoot 700 yards. The problem with that is on a lot of your modern scopes, you have 15 minutes of rotation. And in some of your older scopes, 10 minutes per rotation before you're back down to 0 again. So as you're dialing up, you're going around the horn the whole way up the 15 minutes, let's just say, and then it starts at 1 and then 2. And so you got to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And then you have to start 16, which is 1, and 17, which is 2. And then you have to dial up a little further to 17 and a half. So think about the mental horsepower. You're going around the horn in rotation. Now, it gets worse if it's 10 minutes. Or 12 minutes. Let's just say you have 12 minutes of rotation. Well, now you come around the 12 minute mark, or let's just say it's 12 minutes per rotation. You're setting on 0 again. Now 1 becomes 13, 2 becomes 14, 3 becomes 15. See how that goes? So at 15 or at 5.25 on the dial, you're setting at 17 and a half. Does that make sense? I don't think it does at all. And it gets complicated. So you're counting up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 and a half. And then you're shooting. When you're shooting in mils, and this is just me being honest, I have no dog in this fight other than I've learned over teaching decades and decades and decades. If I can get people to look at millradian and they start using it for the tool that it is, they'll find that it's true. It's the exact number. It's honest and it's fast. 700 yards is 5 mils. 5.05 to be exact. So we could dial 5.1 or 5. It doesn't matter. But I look up at my knobs and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I shoot. Most millradian-based scopes don't go around the horn until 10 mils. Now, some of the older ones are 5 mils of rotation. So you can have those out there. And so if this was that case, even at 700 yards, I would be turning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I would be setting on 0 and shooting. And then if I had to go up 8, 7, 8, 6, 7, 8, 9, I would just go 6, 7, 8, 9 and shoot. Then let's just go one step farther. Let's go the whole way out to 1,000 yards. Using mils, it's 9 mils. Right on the money, 9.00 according to the chart I used for the 308 for both of these rifles. So if I'm going to shoot 1,000 yards shooting mils, I just reach up and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I'm shooting. If you're going to shoot minutes, it is 30.96. In this case, it would be 31 minutes. Count to 31. Now, if it's 15 minutes of rotation, that means you do one full rotation, zip, 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 zip on 0, that's 15. Another full rotation, zip, 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 that's 30. And then plus 1, That's not simpler. If anything, it's a lot more complicated. And in a lot of your higher quality mil-based scopes, it's 10 mils for rotation. And in some cases, 13 and 14 in the Collis, you're never going to go past 13 mils unless you're shooting at like 12, 13, 1400 yards, right? So you're never going to go around the horn back past 0, starting to count at 1 again. That's number one. And number two, it is really fast to count 9.5. It is really fast to go to 6.2. It is really fast to go to 3.1. We know that the average shot at 200 yards for the average rifle is 0.4 to 0.5 mils. We can just hold or dial 0.5 and shoot. We know the average rifle at 300 yards is 1 mil radian. 1 mil radian, 300 yards. Hold it or shoot it. Hold it over 1 mil, shoot, or dial up 1 mil, zip, and shoot. It's that quick. But in minutes, it's 4.25. Big difference between dialing up 1 and shooting and going 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.25. You see how that works? And so I think for us as the average shooters, the first thing to understand, and I think to take into consideration when you're trying to make a decision, I'm not trying to tell you which to shoot. I've shot more animal shooting minutes when I was a kid because I didn't have the option of shooting mils. And so I have no problem with saying that mils and minutes, they're both awesome. And they're accurate. But the problem comes in is when they start selling it with the little white lie of what those numbers actually mean, and they start changing the numbers to fit the narrative, not telling you the truth. When they're saying that minutes is the language of hunters, and we know, and every hunter knows that at 100 yards, 1 inch equals 1 MOA. Well, not true. Not true at all. 1 inch using minutes is actually at 94.5 yards. And it's actually 1.047 inches at 100 yards. And it's not a quarter minute is a quarter inch. A quarter minute is 0.26175. But let's just go ahead and make something up and round it to the closest number so we can make it easier for the rest of us little people to understand it and sell it to us, right? That's the problem. Now, you'll hear some people argue that minutes allow you to dial more accurately, but when you change the narrative and you say, okay, well, we know that 1/10 of a mil moves us 0.36, right? That's a fair amount. 0.36 is a little over a third of an inch. And then we compare that to a minute, and they say, well, a quarter minute is 0.25. Well, yeah, now you can look at that and say, well, yeah, that's like a 60 thousandths off. But it isn't. A true quarter MOA is 0.26175. So it would be 0.262. So we're, 30, 40 thousandths difference. We've closed that gap significantly when you take it from 0.25 to 0.262 compared to 0.36. So when you start looking at these things in their entirety, and you start saying, well, 1/10 of a mil moves our point of impact 0.36 inches. And we say that a true minute is 0.26175. You're 98 thousandths difference, less than 100 thousandths. That's not that big of a deal, honestly. I mean, that's 30 hairs. Human hairs on average are about 3 thousandths thick. So you're talking 30 human hairs stacked on top of each other. That's the difference between the two, especially when you use the real numbers. When you take the 0.25 and you say, well, 0.25 and 0.36, now you're getting a little bit bigger as far as the difference goes. But when you actually use the real numbers, you close that gap significantly, and all of a sudden it's not that big of a deal. And for me, the trade-off is speed. And in almost every hunting scenario that you're going to get into, there are 3 things that are going to play into making longer shots. Number 1 is the ability to get into a good, stable position. So, of course, if you can get into a good, stable position, that's a check, and we're continuing on. And number 2 is being able to get your dope in your gun quickly. That's a problem. So it's 750 yards. Whatever you might need in minutes, 17.75 minutes compared to, 6.1 mils. Getting that dope in there, zip, and shooting or holding is critical. And then for me, the most important part of all this is, and one thing that I've learned a lot with shooting one rifle, especially over a long period of time, is you eventually get to know your dope pretty well. So, for example, Out to 300 yards, if you know your rifle well enough, you don't really have to do anything. You're zeroed at 100 yards, right? And you know that the average mil-based scope or reticle is usually about 0.4 to 0.5 mils at 200 yards and usually about 1 mil at 300. Well, most of your shots are 300 and in, so you hold a half a mil up and shoot at 200 and hold 1 mil up at 300 and shoot and you're good. Those are easy numbers to remember. Not so easy in minutes. 1.75 minutes at 200 yards on average and 3.5 to 3.75 minutes at 300 yards. That's different than 0.4 and 1, right? So I think when you're comparing the two and you want to put a check box or a check mark in a box as to where, let's just say in one column, you have all of these things that the pro column for minutes and the pro column for mils and a negative column for minutes and a negative column for mils. When you start looking at the true numbers for minutes and you get rid of the little white lie of what the numbers really are, there all of a sudden we remove some of those checks that give a plus to the minutes. And then when you start looking at mil radian and all the things that it can do very clean and quickly, especially when it comes to shooting at distance, whether you're holding or dialing, then all of a sudden you start adding check boxes. And then when you start thinking that, the miscalculations you can have when you're using minutes, using quarter rather than the true number compared to a real number, 0.36, which is what a mil radian is. When you start really looking at it as entirety, all of a sudden the check boxes start disappearing on the minutes and start accumulating in the mils. And I think for me as a shooter, when I get asked in the class all the time, is that when people ask, well, what is your preference, minutes or mils? And I always tell people I own both. I actually have some older minute scopes that I've had forever, and I put them on 22s and shoot them all the time. But if I was really seriously going on a hunting trip or if I was going on a match, I would shoot mils right out of the gate without a single question asked. And for these reasons, I always find that they're cleaner. That's my best description of mil radian. They're clean for the real number, 0.36. They're very clean to dial and hold because of the numbers are simple. Even out to 1,000 yards, 9 mils is pretty easy to count down in your reticle or to dial up. 31's not so much, right? You can imagine counting down 31 minutes in your reticle. By the time you get to 26 or 27 or 28, if you lose count, you got to start again, right? And so I always say the first thing is I think they're clean, they're simple. For some wins for the mil radian, especially if you get into longer range shooting, is most of your reticles that are in your spotting scopes and most of the people that are shooting long range, especially now in field shooting. Now, we're not talking F-class or bench rest, but most of those shooters are shooting mil radian. And so they're going to be able to speak the language with you for corrections. So if you miss a half a mil left, you can translate that into your optics by holding or by adjusting using the windage dial to compensate for that. But if you're shooting minutes, you have to do the math to convert the mils to minutes. And there's 3.438 minutes in a mil radian. So imagine how that works, right? The other testament that I can give to this, and I'm not trying to make this too long of a podcast, but the other testament that I can give to this is that in teaching the shooting school for nearly 20 years now and having spent time with clients over decades, once they switch to mil radian, they never go back. And I think for me, that is not me influencing them. That is not me telling them this is what everybody else shoots, so you have to shoot it or you should shoot it because it's what we in the tactical world shoot or it's what we in the hunting world. This has no Jamie in it whatsoever other than letting them come through the school, letting them see both systems, and letting them decide on their own. And I will tell you for a fact that in almost 20 years of teaching, I have never had anyone I've ever shot with change back to minutes once they switch to mils. So when you get someone that has a bigger platform or a big platform and they make statements that they're stating for new shooters or for shooters that are your traditional hunters that, going on a big game hunt might be 300 to 500 yards and supposedly they're the experts in the field, right? But when they make statements like that and they don't get both sides and they just say, here it is, you got to take that with a grain of salt, because most hunters, for say, are hunters and killers for sure, but not necessarily always shooters, right? They're interested in harvesting animals, and their goal is to hunt and enjoy the hunt and being outdoors and being part of this whole process of being in touch with nature and learning the art and craft of all of these great things that we consider traditions for hundreds of years, but not necessarily on the marksman side of it either. So when they hear people like that say things like that without giving them all of the knowledge or giving them the truth, the little white lie of the minute of angle, they can sort of bend it away, and then all of a sudden now you're shooting minutes without ever cracking that door and even looking into mill radian. And that's what my goal of this podcast was, is to say you should look at it. Doesn't say that I'm right and you have to shoot mills, or there's something wrong with you, or you're not an American hunter if you don't shoot mill radian, but I'm saying that you should look at it. You should put all of this stuff on the scales and let it play itself out and balance it and try it. You might be missing out on one of the biggest step forwards in shooting you'll ever do, especially for hunters. And here's the last part with this. I think shooting with mill radians, once you learn the dope for your rifle, is like taking the training wheels off your rifles. You will be able to do so much more faster, so much more efficiently. You're going to be confident in dialing your dope at distances or holding it. Your speed will go up dramatically. For example, the average shooter at 300 yards from the standing position where they start to getting on the gun, most have never shot beyond 200 yards before by day 2 in the class, are jumping on the rifles, getting on the rifle, setting it up, finding the target and engaging it and hitting it at 300 yards in under 4 seconds. And then at 700 yards, our records are standing at 3 and 4 seconds using mills. So to say that that is not a tool for hunters, I've watched many animals get up and start walking away, stop once, and then just walk away gone. And if you can get on that rifle quickly, get in front of them, get your hold, get on the animal, and bang, the animal falls dead before it's able to take that first step, start walking away, that's a win. Now, before we continue on, I want to say a quick thank you to our last sponsor for the podcast and advertiser. That is TriggerTech. Now, TriggerTech is the maker of fine rifle triggers. They make a lot of different makes and models, straight shoe, curve shoe, 2-stage, single stage, diamond, primary, the special, which is one of my favorite dual purpose triggers, but they make a lot of different makes and models for a lot of different reasons. I find them to be one of the safest, one of the easiest to install, one of the easiest to adjust. We don't advertise anybody here on the podcast that we do not use. And so we had a phone call earlier this week about this. And I am always straight with people that regardless of the product, if we don't use it and believe in it, we don't put it on the podcast. Advertisers are by invite only. So the podcast isn't for sale for that way. And I always want everyone to know that when we talk about these things, they're coming from the heart and things that we love to use and things that are our favorites. So I would love TriggerTech for all of those different reasons, and to make them for a lot of different makes and models. And you can stop over to triggertech.com and look at all their fine selection today. All right, so I'm going to burst the bubble a little bit further here. I got one more thing to cover, and then we'll move on to next week's podcast. So we'll have our 2026 shooting school season coming up. We will be announcing the dates on August 1st. They go up. We usually offer an early bird special for anyone that would like to join us. We will be limiting the number of classes to 9 next year, and we actually have had 2 private companies booked 2 classes already. One of them is full, one of them's partially full. So we'll really only have about 7.5 classes for 2026. So if you'd like to join us, registration will open August 1st. August 1st, you can sign up and get a nice discount for the school to come in and join us. And then again, for 2026, that means we'll only have about 7.5 classes available for students to sign up for. It gives them plenty of time to get time off work and get their schedule put together for the next year to join us. So keep an eye out for that. You'll see that come through on a newsletter as well the night before. Looking forward to having everybody coming through in 2026. And then lastly, so in the next podcast, we are going to go one step further in that same 1 minute, spill on the YouTube. The other thing was a big push for the BDC turrets, right? And, because every North American hunter knows that 1 inch at 100 yards equals 1 MOA, and this is why we always use yardage on our turrets for our BDC turrets. I have no idea how that ties together, really, honestly. It makes no sense because if you're using a BDC turret and it's in true MOA, it's not 1 inch at 100 yards, right? But I'm going to dive down this rabbit hole because for me, this is a big one, right? 20 years of doing this. And here's what I can tell you about BDC turrets. You ready for this? It's not bullet drop compensating. It is being duped for cash. So stick around for the next podcast coming out next week, in which we're going to dive into the BDC turret and how they're using something so silly and stupid and such an upcharge. I can't even put as much words around it today as I want to without going down that rabbit hole. But yeah, keep the money in your pocket. We're going to teach you a better way to do it in the next podcast. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us. I really, really appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, please send them down below. You can always reach out to us here at Wolf Precision as well. We'd love to reach out and talk to you. If there's anything you'd like us to cover on the podcast, send us an email. It's contact@wolfprecision.net. And if you enjoyed the podcast and you'd like to share it, we really, really appreciate it. It helps us a lot with our ratings. That means a lot as well. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us. My name is Jamie Dodson. I'm your host, and you're listening to Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building Podcast.